Good evening. Today we are learning Maseches Bava Daf Zayin, and we are in the midst of these unique cases of things that are already on their way to being ruined or destroyed, and then they get destroyed by a second party. We're on Chav Zayin Amud Aleph, about 6-7 lines down, and the Gemara says as follows: Ba'amar Rabba, Nafal merosh hagag v'niska be'isha, an extremely rare scenario. Obviously, it's conceptual, where a person falls off of a roof, and when they land on an isha, and they end up in a scenario of intercourse. This Gemara says, Chayev b'dalad dvarim uvi'avimto lo kana. The halacha is that he is chayev be'arba dvarim. He has to pay for the arba dvarim tsar. What? This has been a couple times in Shas. And the Gemara says, but uvi'avimto lo kana, which is a shtick of Karesh, because we know that the only way that a yavama is niknes is through bia, as we learned previously. However, here there was no intent, right? So that under the circumstances, there would be no kinyan. And the Gemara also says, Chayev benezek b'tzar b'ripui b'sheves aval boshes lo. Much as it might have been an embarrassing scenario for them all, much as that's true, the man who fell, who ended up being in this odd scenario, he doesn't have to pay for boshes. Why not? 10 lines down on Chav Zayin Amud Aleph, Titznan, the Mishnah writes, Eino chayev al haboshes ad sheyehei miskavein, because we have a Mishnah, and the Mishnah writes later on in this Masechta that boshes is only paid when there's kavanah. And in this case, even though it was embarrassing, I presume, but because there was no intent, therefore there is no payment of boshes. But you do make the other payments of nezek, tsar, ripui, and sheves.
For not being careful enough?
The Gemara is assuming over here that it wasn't bekavana, wasn't a pshia. What's the pshia? He didn't intend on this. That makes
the he didn't exercise proper caution.
Rashi says the niska isha chayiv b'al dvarim. Yeah, you go shnafel burak mitsuya daveling karov amazing. If you got totally blown off the roof by a crazy wind when you want to,
right?
You die.
Right, but it's kind of like the same discussion as Tom and Mua.
Like, for example, when you jump off of a building, you should have your clothes on. Like basic baseline. Yeah, that's it's kind of fair.
I don't know.
It's kind of fair.
Where did you get your speaker from?
All right, crazy people. I am a litva.
Oh,
all right, next case. Says the Gemara, V'amar Rabba, Nafal merosh hagag beruach she'ena mitzuya. If a person falls off of a roof with an uncommon wind, v'hizik uvayesh, and he damages and he embarrasses, chayav ala nezek upater b'dalad dvarim, because over here this was totally out of his control. This was a tornado. Beruach mitzuya v'hizik uvayesh. But if it was a regular wind and he fell, and he damaged and embarrassed, so then the halacha is chayav b'dalad dvarim upater ala boshes. He'd still be pater on the boshes, because as we spoke about earlier, this case of Baruch Mitsuya is similar to the case of the first case we learned of Nafal Merosh Hagag V'Niska Be'isha, just like David pointed out from Rashi, that this case is with Ruach Mitsuya. There's a degree of responsibility, but it's not full responsibility. Ve'im nishapech, Rashi explains that if a person's in the air and he turns his body and kind of directs himself to fall onto someone to break his fall a little bit, chayev af al haboshes, because here we do have a degree of kavana, which is that I do plan to fall on you to break my fall, because better that I should fall on you and we both get a little hurt than the person falling should die. Titania, how do we know that this is true? Because we know that the pasuk, which speaks about when two men are fighting and a woman intervenes, let's take a look at the pasuk on the side before we analyze the brisa. The pasuk says, "Ki yinatzu anoshim yachdav ish ve'achiv." If two men are fighting with one another, v'karva eshes ha'echad lahatzil es isha, and a woman wants to save her husband, she's Superwoman. She's going to intervene in this fight, miyad makeu, from the man that's hurting him. So what does she do? V'shalcha yada ve'chzika b'mevushav. She extends her hands and she grabs the other man b'mevushav in that which is busha for him. Namely, it's a homily of sorts for his private parts. So the Gemara says in the Brisa, a third of the way down to Tanya, how do we know that he'd be chayav on boshes if he's nishapech in the air? Because mimashma shenemar v'shalcha yada eini yodea shechzika. Dvarim pshutim. The fact that the pasuk says she's extending her hand already indicates to me that she's going to grab onto that man. Matzam omer v'chzika. What does the word v'chzika teach us? So says the Gemara, Lomar lach kevan sheniskavin lahazik. once there was intent to damage, afal pisha lo niskaven labayesh, even though it wasn't intended to embarrass, afal pikein, we would still be chayev. She would still be chayev for boshes in a case like this. Halfway down, Rabbi presents another case. This is actually, I think I recorded this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is the 6th case of Rabba in a row. So I would imagine, historically speaking, that Rabba, for this set of weeks in yeshiva, was giving shiur on Bava Kama. And he sat down and he's like, okay, Chevra, this is the shaila you're going to learn in morning seder, shiur's at noon. Show up with good Mari Makomos. He would present the case, they would discuss. So here's another case. If I place a boiling hot coal on someone's heart and they die, I am pater. Why am I pater? So Rashi indicates over here, because that guy should have just knocked it off. What are you leaving it there for? If there's a coal that's put on your skin for 2 seconds, knock it off. That should be instinctive. Why wouldn't you take it off? However, al bigdo v'nisrav chayiv, if it was left on his beged, and then he got all burned up and then died, then of course, chayiv. Amar Rava, tarvayu tenanhi. We actually have Mari Makomos for both of these. We have the case of Al Libo, and we also have the case of Bigdo. Let's go through both of them. 10 lines before the end of the parak. Al Libo, in the case of the coal that was put on the person's heart, Titnan, Kavash alav l'socha or o l'socha mayim ve'enu yachol lalos misham v'meis. Let's say that a man holds down another person into fire or underwater, and the victim is not able to escape the scenario and he dies. So obviously, in a case like that, chayiv. However, dachfo l'socha or l'socha mayim. Let's say that I push someone into fire or into water, and v'yachol lalos misham umeis, and he could have gotten out of it, but he didn't. Bad swimmer. So then putter. Maybe bad swimmer is not even a good example. Maybe he was trying to. Yeah, it probably means he wanted to die under the circumstances. He chose to not save himself, then putter. So that gives us the raya brura that where a person has control over the circumstances, he is the person who put him in that circumstance is not going to then be chayiv. So again, this is just a raya to the case that if a gachelis is put on the heart of a person and the victim could have brushed it off and he chose not to, I wouldn't say that's his fault, but and if he then dies, it wouldn't then be that the person who placed the coal is going to be chayiv. What about the case of Bigdo, where we said that if I lit someone's clothes on fire and then that burned the person and he died, Ditznan, we have a Mishnah. If a man says, Kara es ksusi, shavar es kadi, if a man says, tear my clothes or break my pitcher, chayiv, almanas liftor, pater. So in cases like that, it's a little bit different, and that's why the din is different. In that case, that where a person says, Kara es ksusi, shavar es kadi, chayiv. And what the Meforshim here explain is that the person wanted to leave the coal on his chest a little bit longer, and his clothes caught fire. He wanted to leave it longer so that there would be damages so he could collect. That extra amount of time subsequently led to his death, which is the language of Kara es ksusi and shavar es kadi, and therefore the person would be chayiv. Boy Rabba, hiniach kacheles alev avdo mahu. Okay, we know about a regular person, a person who's a ben chorin. What about the din of an eved? How do we view an eved? Do we say ke gufo dami o ke mamono dami? Is he like a goof or is he like mamon? Im timtzalomar ke gufo dami shoro mahu. And even if you want to say that the eved is like a regular person and therefore the person's chayiv misa, the master's chayiv misa, fine. Shoro mahu. What if I put a coal on my animal and the animal dies? Hadar pashta avdo kegufo shora kimamono, that an eved is like a goof and a shor is like mamon. Rashi explains these last two parts right before the end of the parak. Avdo kegufo dami v'imhiniach adam gachelas alev avdo pater shahelo le'eved l'salka. Regular rules like we saw earlier. And shorobit kimamono she'ein bodas l'salka v'chayev. There, the animal doesn't have the wherewithal. He doesn't know where it hurts. Maybe his nervous system functions as not quite as well as people. He doesn't put his hooves where it hurts, and therefore, if he dies, it's still the master's fault because he had no way of taking off the coal. Hadran alach ketzad aregel baruch Hashem. We finished the second parak of Maseches Bava Kama. Yiratzon, we should come back to this daf in 7.5 years. The next parak is called Parak Hamaniach, and we're going to be learning a number of cases tonight. In regards to this Mishnah, listen to the language change here in the Mishnah. Hamaniach es hakad, a person places their pitcher birshus harabim. Uva acher v'niskalba v'shavra. I place the kad, I place my pitcher in rishus harabim. You trip over it and it breaks. Pater. V'im huzakba, if you damage it, bal hachavis chayv b'nizko. Let me say that a little bit better. If the victim gets damaged by it, bal hachavis, the owner of the barrel, is chayv b'nizko. Did you catch that? Hamaniach es hakad, and then we refer to him as bal chavis. Asks the Gemara, pasach bekad v'siyem b'chavis. Our Mishnah is talking out of both sides of its mouth. It seems that in the beginning, the Mishnah in the beginning says hamaniach es hakad, and then we refer to the owner of that kad as the bal chavis, stira. V'tanan nami, there's another Mishnah that makes very similar error. Well, we'll see soon that it's not an error, but a very similar change in language. Zeh ba b'chaviso v'zeh ba b'koraso. One person showed up with a barrel. Another person showed up with a beam. Nishbera kado shel zeh b'koraso shel zeh pater. Here too, nishbera, look what it changed to, kado. What did the Mishnah start with? Chaviso. So if the barrel is broken by the beam, so pater. Here too, pasach b'chavis v'siyem b'kad. And the Gemara says, v'tnan nami, I'll bring you a third marimakom that does the same exact thing. Zeba b'chaviso shal yayin, v'zeba b'kado shal dvash. One person shows up b'chaviso with their barrel of wine. Another person shows up with a pitcher of honey. Nistika chavis shel dvash, the barrel of dvash, which is not what it was called a line ago. A line ago, the dvash container was called a kad. V'shafach zeh, and the other guy poured out yeno, his wine. V'hitzilas hadvash lesocho. The wine was more precious. Wine is lesocho what?
Yeah, honey.
Yes, the honey's more expensive. That's correct. He poured out the wine in order to save the honey. Ein lo elascharo. He doesn't get paid for the wine that he lost. He only gets paid for the schar, let's call it the per hour amount of work that he did to save the honey. Honey can be very expensive. If you go to Jewel, you'll see that there are different brands. Some of them are crazy expensive, and then the Jewel brand is like much cheaper. But wine, some of the wines we have are through the roof. Unbelievable. When I was in New York a few weeks ago for Shabbos, we walked in, there are bottles of wine that are thousands and thousands of dollars. Yeah. Unbelievable. I'm like, do you guys have Bartanura? What is that? It tastes good. What are you spending $1,000 on a bottle of wine for? It's absolutely nuts. They had a bottle of Glenlivet there that was $8,000.
Really?
That one.
No, I'm just venting now.
Yeah, it's sort of.
It's not wine.
Be careful.
Rabbi Robinson's not going to like this discussion. No kiddush on yain sraf, unless you have a whole coast. No. Yeah. So here too, same thing. Pasach bekad v'siyim b'chavis. Over here too, we see the interchangeability of the pitcher and the chavis. Amarav Papa, no big deal. Hainu kad, hainu chavis. You're right. They're perfectly interchangeable. And the fact that the Mishnah interchanges them is of no consequence. Says the Gemara l'may nafka. And what are we talking about over here that we have these changes? To what end is it interchangeable? What does that mean that it's interchangeable? Says the Gemara, the mekachu memkar. So that when there's a sale, if a person says, I'd like to buy a chavis from you, and he pays for a chavis, then he goes to the store and picks up a kad, he picks up a pitcher, they're deemed to be interchangeable with no halachic difference between them. It wouldn't be a mekach tos, clean, no problem at all. Hechidami, says the Gemara, what's the case? 3 lines from the bottom, second of the wide lines. If you're in a place where a kad is not called a chavis, or v'chavisa lo karu kada, or where a barrel is not called a pitcher, halo karula. There, the case, if nobody's calling it anything over there, if they're not interchangeable, that can't be our case. Says the Gemara, lo tzricha, it must be deruba karula lekada kada ulechavisa chavisa. We're talking about a locale where most people refer to a pitcher as a pitcher, and most people refer to a chavis as a chavis. But but a percentage, seemingly less than half, there's a percentage of people that do use the terms interchangeably. You might have thought that we follow the majority of the people who call a kad and call a chavis, and therefore, If you were to be in a case of mekach memkar, it would be a problem. So havamina ma'udete mazil basaruba kamash malan de'ein holchin b'mamon achar harov. That when it comes to the world of mammon, we do not follow the majority. And the halachic application of this line over here is in regards to language. Of course, there are other applications, but right here, what we're saying is follows. Let's say that 70% of society calls a pitcher, and they call a barrel. And 30% of society uses the terms interchangeably. If you then make a transaction of one with the other's name, Ein holchin b'mamon achar harov. We don't care about the 70%. The 30% is sufficient to rely upon. There is no problem with the mekach memkar. It is a kosher transaction. You can already see Rashi and Tosfos are digging in on this topic of ein holchin b'mamon achar harov. In an iyun shiur, we would stop here for a month or two, and then we would come back and by Pesach time. Says the Gemara, our Mishnah had said, Uva acher v'niskal ba b'shavra pater. We had said a case scenario that if I put out a pitcher or a barrel, and then another person trips on it and breaks it, he's pater. Says the Gemara, am I pater? Why would the person who broke it be pater? After all, iboile iyune umezal. Get off your phone. Stop looking into your phone while you're walking. We've all seen the videos of people who are on their phones and fall into fountains and fall into holes in the ground, spacing out. Apparently, they had these issues back in the day also, but not with phones. Why would we ever say that a man walking around is pater? Open your eyes. Stop walking over things. Pay attention. Says the Gemara, a couple of different possibilities. Amre debei Rav, mishmei de Rav. I'm a little bit of a jerk. I took 50 barrels off of my semi-tractor trailer and I put them across the way in the Rishus Harabim. I made it difficult. What do you want me to do? The guy's got to walk. He steps, he breaks something. So therefore he's pater. But yes, in general, a person should watch where they're going. And in general, if that which was placed in the Rishus Harabim was small and not overwhelming, so then we can fairly assume that it's his obligation to watch where he's stepping. Masha Ein Kain, if it's Rishus Harabim Kula Chavios, he no longer has an obligation. Or Shmuel Amar Be'afei Lashanu. We're talking about a case scenario where maybe it wasn't 50 chavios, maybe it was just one or two, it was a reasonable amount, but it's dark out. And I'm walking in a regular path. And I didn't see that happened. Last night, this happened in my room. One of my dear children left an open bottle of water on the floor of my bedroom. Perfect place for it. No problem at all. Walking into the bathroom, I give a punt kick to this little bottle of water that sprays all over the place. And thank God they also left a towel on the floor, which was convenient under the circumstances. But still, it was dark. I didn't see it. I kicked it. So the Gemara says, Be'afei lashanu, he's pater because it's dark out. What does that mean? That during the day, you would taka bi chayev for breaking that kli. Open your eyes and pay attention. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Bekeren Zavis. Rabbi Yochanan says that it is Bekeren Zavis. And Rashi over here explains the case on the fourth line, Dibra Maschel Bekeren Zavis. Kishenichnasin mimavui lemavui. When you go from one walkway to another, min hatzad on the side, hinicha betzad hamavui etzel hakeren. It was right around the corner. Uchshehichzir ze panav lo rosa. You put it in a bad place. Don't put it in a bad place. In that case, says Rav Yochanan, that's the case that you're pater. But any other iteration, you'd be chayev. Amar Rav Papa, lo daika masnisin ela oke Shmuel oke Rav Yochanan. He says, I could understand our Mishnah, the case where we said that a person who trips over your item and breaks it is pater. I could understand Shmuel's reasoning, like we said, about Be'afei lashanu, or of Yochanan's reasoning that spoke about Bekeren Zavis, but he doesn't like the answer of Rav, which is Kula Chavios, that Rishus Harabim is filled out. The Ike Rav, if it's like Rav, my area Niskal, Afilu Shavar Nami. What do you mean Niskal, that he tripped over it, even if he literally threw it out of the way? That would also be mutter under the circumstances. You have no right to take your barrels and block up a Rishus Harabim. Get out of the way. It broke while I was moving it. Not my problem. Why is it only niskal if he tripped over it? Even if he did it on purpose, it'd be fine. So Amrav Zvid Mishmei de Rava, Hu Adin de Afilu Shavar. You're absolutely right. Even if I threw it out of the way and it broke, I would still have the same din. Why is it that we said niskal, that if I tripped over it, even if I broke it by moving it, I would still have the same din? Says the Gemara, because I did the baila misne seifa, because of what we have to learn at the end of the brisa. What did we learn at the end of the brisa? That if the guy who's walking breaks your kli, he is chayiv to pay damages for it. The dafka niskal there, that's not the reisha. In the seifa, where I broke it intentionally, that's with a degree of intent, I should say. That's only of niskal. Aval shavar lo, and the reason. But if I break it with intent, not because there were too many of them, but I just break it because I'm a bad guy, so then that would not be the case that I'd be pater. My taima hu de'azik anafshe katani reisha niskal, because he broke it himself. Therefore, the reisha used the language of niskal because of the seifa. Says the Gemara, similarly as we saw earlier, Amarle Rabbi Abba the Ravashi, Hachi Amre b'Ma'arava. This is what they said in Eretz Yisrael in the West. Mishmei de Rav Ula, Lefi she'ein darkan shel bnei adam lehizbonen b'drachim. The reason why we say that a person is pater is because they are specifically not paying attention. So this is actually, I shouldn't say what I said. This is actually different than what we said before. Because here he's saying that the reason you're pater is because people don't have a habit of looking. He seems to argue with our initial approach of the Gemara that people should look. There was a case like this where someone was walking and he didn't pay attention and he broke something, and Shmuel was mechayev him. And b'pompadisa v'chiyev Rabba, it's probably supposed to be Rabba, because that's how it's quoted later and in Kisvei Yad. And says the Gemara, Bishlama Shmuel Kishmaise. I could understand Shmuel. Shmuel taught us above Be'afei Lashanu. Why in the case in Naharda was Shmuel Mechayev? Because maybe it wasn't at night. Ela Rabba, should be Rabba. Ela Rabba Lema Kishmuel Svirale. You're going to say that Rabba holds like Shmuel? Amara Papa Karna de Atra Have. What were we talking about? We're talking about a season where everybody's bringing their olives to be pressed. There's a community, a public use community olive press. And to Kevan de Birshus Ka'abde, and since there was permission from the tzibor, everybody knew that there was a public olive press, and everybody brought their own barrels of olives to press them into oil. So therefore, so therefore he had to be more careful in that case. The Gemara shifts gears pretty sharply. We're not really talking about the same sugya anymore. We're halfway down on Chav Zayin Amid Beis, and we'll be heading to the top of Kav Ches Amid Aleph before we finish today. Shalach le Rav Chizda le Rav Nachman. Hare Amru l'Rekuva. If I hurt you with my knee, shalosh, we have to pay units of 3. Uleve'ita, if I kick you, chamesh. Ulis nukeres, says the Gemara. That's Rashi explains that's an ukaf, that's a saddle. Then shloshes. That's an embarrassing way to go. Someone beats you up with a saddle, you have to pay 13. Asks the Gemara, lepadna demara, if I use the handle of a shovel, ula kupina demara, or if I use the head of the shovel, the blade itself, mai. So what's the din there? Shalach le chizda knasa kamigbis bebavel. We just gave a list of knasos, of different financial punishments for behaviors that you should not be doing. But we've already learned there is no knas in Bavel, because only the Beis Din in Eretz Yisrael is able to paskin on those shilos. So therefore, it says the Gemara asking against Rav Chizda, how can you say that? Eimali gufa de uvda hechi hava. Tell me exactly what the case was, Rav Chizda. So Shalach le, Rav Chizda said, Dahu gargusa debe trey. There was a water pit that was shared by 2 people. Zechol Yoma, every day, have a dalichad minayu. I had it on Monday, Wednesdays, and Friday, and you had it on Sundays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays. And asachad, one day, kadali beyoma de lo delay. And I went to the water pit, I went to the well, and I was drawing up water on a Sunday. Sunday is not my day. Sunday's your day. Amarle, so you said to me, Phil, what are you doing? Yoma didihu, that's my day. Lo ashkachbe. I completely ignored you. Flatline. Shakal panda demara and machye. So you picked up a shovel like a normal person and you smacked me upside the head with the shovel. Reasonable. Amar le, he said to him, this is now responding.
A day to close. That's what it's talking about.
Relax on your venting over there, Michael. Relax and drive slowly.
And no shovels.
And no shovels. After all, we're going to see that this is actually mutter to hit someone with a shovel. So you should be careful. Amar le mea pandi bepadna bepanda lemache. You could hit the guy 100 times. Afilu lemanda Amar lo avid inish dina lenafshe. Even according to those who say that you're not allowed to take legal matters into your own hands, but b'makom pseida avid inish dina lenafshe. However, if you are going to be at a loss, you are allowed to take matters into your own hands. So, for example, let's say someone is in my backyard and I grow tomatoes. Someone who I don't want to be in my backyard, who has no permission, is taking tomatoes. And I tell him to stop. He doesn't stop. Pick up a shovel, smack him. Because in a case of pseida, you're allowed to get physical. That's what the Gemara says. You're not allowed to kill him.
In your property.
On your property, on the hefsid. It's not self-defense for my body. That's for sure true. That's pashut. What? This shiur is so complicated. I have to deal with Michael. I have to deal with Tex. It's very complicated.
To think if
Mark was here. Oh, especially I'm glad he wasn't here tonight. Baruch Hashem. Says the Gemara, the Itmar of Yehuda Amar, Lo avid inish tina lenafshe. In general, we have a machlokes about this. Rabbi Yehuda holds that a person is not allowed to take matters into their own hands from a Jewish legal perspective. Rav Nachman Amar avid inish tina lenafshe, that a person is allowed to. And heicha de ikap seda, where we're dealing with fiscal loss, a financial loss, there nobody argues. Everyone agrees that when we're talking about financial loss, you're allowed to get physical. You can physically remove the person from your property. And as physical as he gets, you can respond. You shouldn't kill the guy, and you should try other methods of stopping him. You can be mevater if you want, but ladina, technically speaking, in a case of hefsid where you're losing out, you are allowed to physically fight with a person who has your stuff. Kipligi, the only time we ever have a machlokes about avid inish dina lenafshe, of a person taking matters into their own hands. Kipligi echad delekap say that's only where there's no loss. I don't want you in my backyard. I'm not losing anything from you being in my backyard. You're just annoying, and I wish that you were not here. So says the Gemara, Yehuda Amar lo avid inish dina lenafshe. When there's no hefsid, you're not allowed to have a physical altercation. To cave and the lake up seda lezel kamedaina. Because there's no physical losses, there's no hefsid. I can just take you to Bezdin for trespassing or whatever I think you're doing wrong. But because there's no loss, I'm not allowed to physically touch you. However, Rav Nachman Amar avid inish dina lenafshe. A person is allowed to do that. Let's talk ladina. You have a piece of paper that you hung up on a light post for a kidnapped child, and someone is taking down that piece of paper, and you own the paper. Ladina, I don't recommend it, but Ladina, there's room to say that you can physically interrupt what they're doing. You can stand between them. Again, you should be careful to not get yourself arrested. I'm not saying don't do this. I'm just saying legally, technically, halachically speaking, there is room for that to be said. Avid inish dina lenafshe. The kevan dibedin avad, because what you're doing is within the realms of halacha. Lo tarach, we're not going to force you to be matriach to wait 6 months for this guy to get into Bezdin for a din Torah. Not required. Asks the Gemara, Masiv Rav Kahana, wait 1 second. Ben Bagbag Omer, 3 lines from the bottom on Chav Zayin Amid Beis. Don't go into your friend's yard to take back that which is yours. Shematire alav keganav, lest you appear to look like a ganav. Ella shivores shinav, break his teeth. The emorlo sheli ani notel. So what does this mean? Rashi says Ella shivores shinav klomar kach bechazaka the kasha the Rabbi Yehuda. How could Rabbi Yehuda
No sneaking around? You just bang on the door and take it back.
just walk into his yard and take it back? No banging on the door, just go get it.
Don't walk into it. I'll take on it.
Ella shivor es shinav.
No. Bang at the front door and take it back.
Oh, yeah. So klomar kach bechazaka, you can take it back, but you shouldn't look like a ganav in the process and say out loud, va'amar lo, shali ani notel kasha Rabbi Yehuda. Says the Gemara, Amcha, Imcha, is he really with you? Ben bagbag yichidahu. He's a das yachid. Upligi rabbanan alei. Rav Yanai says, I have another taich. Rav Yanai Amar, my shavor shinav. What does it mean to break his teeth? Bidin. Shavor shinav means to bring him to a din Torah. The Gemara is not having that. That's not what Shavor Shina means. It shouldn't say ve'emor lo. It should say ve'omrim lo. It shouldn't say that he said. It should be that they, the Dayanim said. It shouldn't say sheli ani notel in the Brisa ben Bagbag, but rather shelohu notel miboile, and therefore kasha against the Shita of Rav Yanai. I looked this up in the Shulchan Aruch and Choshen Mishpat Siman Daled and the Rama Paskins Ladina that Avid Inish Dina Lenafshe, certainly in a case of Hefsid. Please be careful, but that is technically the case. We will stop right here. We will learn tomorrow night, Thursday night, in the main base medrash in the back couple of tables for our Mishmar L'Artzenu program. Wishing you all a beautiful night.